Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is the Microsoft Graph community call for June of 2021. Today, we've got three great topics that we'll be covering in terms of the Assignments API, some dev tips and tricks when working with Microsoft Graph, and also a little overview of Microsoft Graph Data Connect. So here's our set of wonderful presenters that we'll be having today. First up will be Leif and Meitan. I'm talking about the education APIs and the Assignments APIs. Also, Elio will be talking about the dev tips and tricks. And then our own Nick Charlebois from our Graph CPX team will be talking about Microsoft Graph Data Connect. If you are interested in presenting on a future topic, please do let us know. You can reach out to myself, brian.jackett@microsoft.com, or our manager, Jeremy Thake, jeremy.thake@microsoft.com. Love to hear any kind of community contributions. We'll talk a little bit more about this as well near the end of the session. Some upcoming updates that'll be coming in August to make you all aware of. But basically, opportunities for people in the community who may want to present on this call. So whether it's a demo that you have, whether it's a new solution you're working on, maybe inventive ways that you're working with Microsoft Graph, please do feel free to reach out to us, and we'll see if we can get you lined up in our scheduling for this. And without further ado, I'll turn things over to Leif and Meitan to talk about the Assignments API. Leif, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Leif Brenne, and with me is Meitan. From the Assignments team. We are on the education team, and we are just about to launch out the assignment services into GA. So I'm going to talk about a little bit the background for it, and then do a demo on the Graph Explorer functionality for as well. So let's go to our stuff. Overview, assignment services is meant to be used, or is not meant to, it is used only for the Teams EDU tenant we have, and to class teams. So basically, assignments is a workflow for teachers to do to create assignments to the teachers, include the Word documents and URL and so forth. Students will complete the coursework, help us celebrate success for it, and then the teacher can grade these assignments afterwards. So just quickly, we can create these assignments through Teams directly, or through you to share Teams functionality. Once you send it to the Teams, the student will see those either on the mobile phone or on their web and desktop version of Teams, and will list all the upcoming assignments. As you probably know, there's a lot of people doing home assignment this year, right? And within each assignment, you can have documents and reference materials and so forth. Once the student's done, you turn in and celebrate the success for that particular student, which is awesome, of course. And then the last thing the teacher will do is grade these assignments. It's going to flow for that functionality. Assignments, as I said, is part of Teams EDU. A team, of course, multiple teams in Teams, but a team in our case is actually a class. So a member is a student and an owner is a teacher. That's how we think about it in Teams EDU. And within a team, you have one or more assignments. Of course, multiple assignments you have. And then for each assignment, you have a submission. So a submission would be basically work the student will do to submit back to the teacher for grading. Once the in addition to that, they also have resources. So resources are basically supported materials. So it could be a URL link or PowerPoint deck and so forth, basically. And the last thing you do, of course, submission it, you get an outcomes, and the outcomes are grading and our rubric stuff. So kind of high level overview of the functionality. Right now, we are, the way we see people using these things or our partners today is, again, data out of our system to report to parents and teachers. It could be putting data back into the system. So for instance, a education application will do these things to have like a quiz, and they put the grades back into our system. So that's kind of examples of Graph API today. So right now, we're currently in beta, but I would say next week or two, we'll be actually in V1 release. We added their app context support for all statements. We added deep link support. You can have a link to your assignments back to the functionality. We added our assignments to a calendar and small functionality as well. So that's kind of the flow for our roadmap for the Graph API itself. So without further ado, let's do a demo. That's always more interesting, and this is me talking. So May, take it away.
Hi, my name is May, engineer on the assignments team, and I'm going to show you guys a demo of some of the core functionality that can be achieved through our assignment service Graph APIs. So I'm going to go ahead and share my entire screen here. And I'm here in Graph Explorer, and Graph Explorer is a developer tool where you can pretty easily try out our Graph APIs. And in some of my other tabs here, I have some documentation, which we might be referencing throughout this demo. And you can easily find this as well at docs.microsoft.com, and you can check out some of this Graph API documentation. So here, the first request that I'm going to make is getting a list of my classes. And so here you can see that my URL has the graphmicrosoft.com. We have beta education. This is the education set of APIs, me, and classes. So we're currently in beta. Like Leif said, we're soon going to be in v1.0. Just for this demo, we're going to show you in beta. So I'm going to run this query, and I'm going to get a list of my demo users' classes that I'm a part of. And I'm signed in here as a demo user. This is the teacher version of me, and I'm going to scroll down to all of my classes, and I can see here that I have a class that I have prepared specifically for this demo, and it's called Assignments Graph API 101. And it's got a couple of properties in here. Every class does. It's got some display names, it's got descriptions, and very importantly, and it's going to be very useful to us, is it has an ID. So what I'm going to do is copy this ID, and I'm going to access this class directly. And I'm going to tack on an extra segment into my URL, and I'm actually going to say /assignments at the end of this too. So now we're accessing assignment-specific APIs, and we're going to get the assignments that are associated with my class. And so here you can see that my class actually has a great number of assignments. There are some Explore Graph Basics, try publishing an assignment, and a bunch of different assignments here. You notice that the assignment has a lot of properties associated with it as well, such as the class ID it belongs to, the display name, the due date, assign dates, some properties about whether submissions are allowed and when they're allowed, and importantly here we have a status. So some of these assignments say draft, which means that I'm still working on this assignment and it hasn't been given to students yet, and some of these say assigned, which means that it has been given to students. One of the things that we can do with this API that people find useful is that we can filter down the number of assignments that we have. And so I'll show you an example of a filter. So here we can filter that the status is assigned. And this might be useful for if we have a class that has a lot of drafts and we have a lot of assignments that are actually in play, and we want to get just the ones that are actually visible to students and ignore the ones that are just in draft state for the users. Other filters that you might want to use are ones that filter out by a due date after a certain date. So if you have a lot of assignments within a particular class and you only want to get the most recent ones, that might be a useful filter to take advantage of. So what I'm going to show you now is kind of the core workflow for the life cycle of an assignment within Assignment Service. And the first thing we can do is to create an assignment. And the URL we're going to be at is this /assignments URL that we were just at, but instead of using a GET request, we're going to use a POST request this time. And here I'm going to paste in a request body. And I'll show you guys that request body here. There are a lot of properties on the assignment like you just saw, but the only two that are actually truly required in order to create a new assignment is the display name and the due date. Here I've added a couple of other properties just to show you guys. I'm adding some instructions, and I have to specify that this is text instructions, and I have some content, and I'm adding a grading field where I want to specify that this assignment is going to be graded for a maximum of 100 points. You don't have to have this. You can have assignments that are ungraded, and you can simply leave out this property. I'm a volunteer computer science teacher, and so I'm using an assignment that I actually do give my students. We read the technical news, and every week they have to submit something where they read some articles and then write a response and even link something that the students found on their own that they found interesting. So here the content says, read the attached resources and write a response and attach something that you found interesting. So I'm going to post this assignment, which means I'm going to create it. And you'll see that when I've created it, the status here says draft. I haven't given this to my students yet. And that's a good thing because there's a couple other things that I want to do to my assignment. But first I'll show you here that once I've created my assignment, it gets this important field, which is an ID. So my new assignment has its own unique identifier, and it's going to come in handy because I'm going to copy this, and I'll show you that I can attach this ID to the end of this request. Let me just get rid of this post body, and I can fetch that ID or that assignment directly by its ID. And now that I have access to this assignment directly, I'm going to do a couple of actions to it to modify it. So in my instructions for this assignment, I said I'm going to have the students read some resources. And in order for them to do that, I need to attach some resources. So I'm going to show you guys 3 different types of resource attachments that we can add to the assignments using this API. So the first one is a link resource. This is one of our most popular resources. It simply attaches a link to an assignment that students can access. So I'm going to tack on a new segment. It's called resources. So assignments/assignment ID/resources, and it's going to be a post. And in my post body here, I'm going to paste in this body of information. And all of this is going to be available for reference on the docs website. So you can take a look at these properties and follow along for how to use them. So in my post body, I have a resource where I can specify a display name. I can specify the type of this resource, and we do offer several types of resources. This one is a link resource, and then I get to put in a link. And so one of the resources, or one of the links that are interesting lately is this article here that I found regarding some technical news from this week. And so I'm going to add this resource to the assignment. And you can see that I get this resource back. It has a couple of other fields attached to it, such as who created it and who last modified it, but mostly it's persisting some of the fields that I added. Let me add another resource to this assignment. And in addition to links, we also support files. And I want to upload a file and have that file be associated with this assignment. And in order to do that, we have to do a couple of steps first. The first thing is, if we want to use files, these files have to be stored somewhere. And for us, these files are stored in SharePoint. So we're really uploading a file into SharePoint and then associating that SharePoint file with the assignment. So what I'm going to do is set up a folder in SharePoint in order to house my file. And so the API to do that is set up resources folder. And this is actually one of the newer APIs that we have. And it's going to be a post, but it's going to be an empty post body. So for this assignment, I'm still at the same base URL here, and the end segment is just set up resources folder. Taking a bit here. Oh, there we go. And we have a resources folder attached to this assignment now. What I get back is a body of the assignment. And I have this new field on my assignment now, and it's called resources folder URL. What I'm going to do is copy this URL, and this is going to be useful to me. So I'm going to copy this URL. I'll show you this next segment in Postman just because it's a little bit easier to work with for just this segment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a new API here. It's actually a OneDrive API or a SharePoint API. And I just pasted that resources folder URL as the base URL here. And I'm going to use this segment at the end, which is : the name of your file that you want to upload and : content. This is a put API. And what I'm going to do is in the body specify that the body is binary, and I'm going to go ahead and select a file. And here I have another interesting article that I want my students to read. This is some gadgets that are going to make you a better swimmer. And so I'm going to upload this file here, and I'm going to hit send. Oh, sorry about that. I'm going to refresh my auth token, and then I'm going to hit send. There we go. So what I get back here is I've uploaded my file into that new folder that I have just created. And now in my response, I can see that my file has a graph ID. And so what I'm going to do is to come back to my Graph Explorer, and I'm going to register our new file with my assignment. I know this one has a couple of different steps in here. And I'll paste in this body now. All right. So I'll show you guys how you can create this file URL. And I'm adding a new resource type here. The resource has a display name. It has a new type. Last time I showed you a link resource. Now we have a file resource. And for a file resource, instead of specifying a link, we have to specify a file URL, which is where it lives in SharePoint. And how we put that together is that we'll take this base URL where we created this folder, and we're going to tack on the item ID that we just got from uploading that file. There we go. And then I'm going to run this query in order to add my new file resource into our assignment. And actually, I can get the resources that are associated with this assignment by using a get call on the same URL. And you can see now that we have two resources that are attached to my assignment. I have a file resource and I have a link resource. Okay, so now that I have these resources that are attached to my assignment, I'm going to go ahead and publish this assignment and make it visible to students. And to do that, I'm going to use a post request with an empty post body. And instead of this resources segment, I'm going to use a /publish segment. And I'm going to run that query. And you'll notice here that my status no longer says draft, it says published. And if I wait a couple of moments, I can actually fetch my assignment again. And it's actually going to say assigned. So these are the various states that an assignment can live in. When it's a draft, it's not visible to students. When it's published, it's in that process of being given to students. And when it's assigned, it means it's fully available to students. So now that I have my assignment assigned, I'm going to show you the grading flow. Normally in here, I would also show you the student flow, but for the sake of time, we're going to assume that our students have submitted their work, and we're just going to go ahead and assign some grades. What I can do now is, now that my assignment is assigned, I can fetch the student submissions that are associated with this assignment. And to do that, I'm going to keep using a GET request, and I'm going to tack on the /submissions segment at the very end, assignments/ID/submissions. And I'm going to run that query. You can see here that for this assignment, I have 4 submissions, one for every student in my class. And each submission has a set of properties associated with it as well. Here we have the status of the submission, which is working. None of my students have submitted yet. When students have submitted, it's going to say submitted. Here they're still working on it. It has some properties for when it was submitted, so they haven't submitted yet, so they're null. And very importantly, we also have some IDs here for every submission. So every submission has a unique ID. So I'm going to just grab this first submission here. We're going to assume that the student has looked at their assignment, they've submitted, and I'm going to fetch just that submission by attaching that ID to the URL. And I can get the same information again, just isolated to this one student. And remember, I told you at the beginning of this assignment, I said, I'm going to make this a graded assignment for a maximum of 100 points. Well, I can see some of that grading and feedback information by tacking on one more segment, submission/ID/outcomes. So just like Leif showed you guys in the PowerPoint slides, every submission can have a multiple of outcomes. So I'm going to fetch just the outcomes that are associated with this submission. And these are things like grades, like feedback, like rubrics if we're using any, and we can see that this submission has 2 outcomes. We can provide feedback and we can provide points. Right now, they have no information because we haven't provided any of these things. What I'm going to do is show you guys how to provide some points feedbacks. So I'm going to patch an outcome, and I'm going to tack the ID of the outcome, and yes, outcomes have their own ID here as well. I'm going to copy that and tack that onto the end of this URL as well. I'm going to use a patch request, and in this body, I'm going to put the body of this points outcome. And you can see here that I have the type of my outcome that I want to change, which is the points. And in here I have some fields that specify the points that I want to provide. Let's say this student did a fantastic job and I'm giving them 100 out of 100 points. And so now I can patch this student's outcome. And we can see that the points have been updated to show 100. I can fetch the outcomes for this specific submission again. And you can see it also has the updated points here. And I'll show you one last request regarding outcomes, which is that I can show the outcomes for all submissions. And this might be useful for if we wanted to do a report of student information, how well students did on this assignment overall, and just get all of the grades together for a grade book or another application of the same sort. So I'm going to use an expand statement. And I'm going to do $, expand, and I'm going to expand outcomes. And so here I am fetching, according to this URL, assignment/assignment ID, submissions, all of my submissions, and expand outcomes for every one. So I'm going to run that query. And you'll see that my submission object is looking a lot bigger now because on every submission now we have the points and feedback information that's coming back as well. I'm going to go back to just my one assignment that I have assigned some points to. Let me find that one here. And it's this assignment or this submission right here. And I'll fetch that ID one more time. And I'll show you our return action. So again, this is an operation that we do for a single submission. And so my URL is submission/ID, and I'm going to tack on this last segment, which is return. And this is going to be a post request. And I'm going to run this query. What this has done is published those points to the student. It's like handing work back to the student. And now the student gets to view their grades and their feedback. And you can see that this submission status has now changed. It used to be working. At some point, if they had submitted, it would have said submitted. And now it says returned, which means it has been given back to the student in order for them to view. And that was the last API that I was going to show you guys. And that concludes our demo. So thank you guys so much for your time. We're still working on these APIs, and we're about to take this set that I showed you guys GA very soon. We'd love to hear your feedback and how you're using this API. So let us know.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Leif. Thank you, Meitan. This is excellent information. Great to see this coming out of beta, moving into V1. We always love hearing that for all different workloads on Graph, so really appreciate that. In the interest of time, we will actually move into our next topic, and if we have time at the end, we will open up for Q&A. So feel free to stick around, everyone, for the end of the our call today. And if we have time, we'll open that up to the floor for everyone to ask questions like that. So next on our agenda, we have Elio Struyf. We'll be talking about some dev tips and tricks related to Microsoft Graph. Elio, if you'd like to share your screen or come off mute, we'd love to have you present that today.
Sure. Can you hear me? Most probably you can.
Yep, you're all good to go.
Okay. In the interest of time, I will just share. I won't share any slides. Just speak about what I was going to do. So, hello, I'm Elio from Belgium, founder of Squarl. If you want to know more, just take a look at it. But what I want to try to explain you is that there's a couple of very useful plugins out there for Visual Studio Code. I was going to do a bit more demos, but I'm going to pack it all in a couple of basic things. So what have I developed over the past month? Two kind of Visual Studio Code extensions. I think they were already mentioned a couple of times by the team. So there are two very handy Microsoft Graph things that you can use for Visual Studio Code. One is the MS Graph completion, which allows you to use all the Microsoft Graph URLs and get auto-completion for them inside Visual Studio Code, because I love to use the Graph Explorer, but sometimes I just don't know which URLs there are available or which actions and which properties are available. So I wanted to simplify a couple of things. So that's why this Visual Studio Code completion extension was created. And besides that, I also created the Microsoft Graph Essentials, still in preview at the moment. Actually, there's nothing that limited for not going out of preview. But what this Graph Essentials extension will do is it packs all the good things that are out there, but it comes with a couple of handy things as well, like CSS completion for if you're using the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Also, all the HTML elements are in there. What I use very often is quickly open the API documentation site or the Graph Explorer site so that I don't have to open my browser. No, it's just going to open that for me. And then a lot of these very handy snippets when you want to do some React things with the toolkit, or when you use HTML, or when you use CSS. So let's just jump into a demo. I prepared a lot, but now I cleaned everything. So now I started all with empty files. So what I have here is the well-known graph.microsoft.com URL. So if you have one of these extensions installed, if you have the essentials, then it automatically comes with the autocompletion. And if you install the autocompletion, you only get that. But what will happen is from the moment you're going to use graph.microsoft.com and you type / it will get the autocompletion for you. So basically you can select which path you want to add, and then it's going to show you all the functionalities that are available. Also, what methods are available, like get and post. Let's say that we want to go to me, and then on the me endpoint, you will see that there's much more. So let's say we go for drive. And now it takes a little bit longer if there's a lot of caching going on, but if your cache doesn't have the API yet cached inside Visual Studio Code, then it will do an API call, it will receive that information, and then it will cache that information. So the next time it will be much faster. So I can then say routes and so on and so on. It also supports tokens. So if we are going to go to drives, or let's say drive, no, is it drives? Yeah, here. Then we can specify a key, which is the drive ID. This is also being supported by the API. So let's say that my ID is 000, and if I do /, it will fetch the next part of it. So very handy. That way you don't have to go back each and every time to the API documentation. Still, if you want to do it, you can also go via commands. And in the commands, you will get graph. There you will see open Graph Explorer site or open the API documentation site, one of the two most used ones. And what I'm just doing there is you opening that particular site, nothing more than that, but very easy to just open it from your favorite code editor. So same thing goes for the Graph Explorer site, and then it just opens that particular website. Great. So what's more, if you're using the toolkit comes with a lot of very handy elements, web components, but these web components all come with their own properties, for instance. So we can go to the documentation site, or you can install the essentials. And from the moment you install the essentials, you can do MGT, and then you get all the components that are available. So let's say that we are going for agenda. And then you also get auto-completion on them. So everything is documented here. So all of this information comes from the actual documentation. So it's not something I build up. It's scripted so that it scrapes everything from the documentation side, and it allows you to then say, okay, this is tree, for instance. And this is working for each and every one of these components. So MGT, login, people, person, and so on. So same thing, avatar, and so on. So user ID is user ID of that particular user, and that works. Another thing what you can expect from the plugin is if you want to do custom styling. So if you want to apply your own custom styles to the Microsoft Toolkit styles or components, that's something you can do. How? Yet again, there are some things for it. So if you do MGT agenda, it's a code snippet, and then it will say, okay, this is the MGT web components, and then you can add your own custom class and you can start styling them. But if you already used these styles, you might know that they are using CSS variables, and maybe you don't know all the CSS variables out of your head, and that's where, yet again, the tool comes into place. Here you can, for instance, see agenda, and there you will receive all the information from the agenda. So if I go to Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and maybe that's also a good URL to be adding to the extension. So if we are going to agenda here, and we are going to the custom CSS properties, these properties, they will be available here inside your code editor. So dash agenda dash, and then you will see header color. Oh, this is the event, but yeah, basically, if I go to event and event, there we go. So all these things that you see here, you will see also on the left side, and so on. So that was actually it. If you want to install these, then just go to Visual Studio, the marketplace, and then look for my name or look for Microsoft Graph, and then you should be able to find them. So that was it. So nothing more to show, as
those are excellent.
All of the demos.
Those are excellent extensions to show in there, Elio. Quick question: if people have any feedback, suggestions, where can you point people to? Is there anything open source for this, or is this just you have a way to collect feedback? What's kind of your mechanism for that?
Oh, if you just go to the Visual Studio Code, to the extension, there is a link to the GitHub repository. So both of them have their own GitHub repository, open source. So if you want to add something, feel free to do so. Like Seb was going to add a couple of things to them. He wanted to do post requests and also put the body of these post requests inside the plugin. I haven't seen a PR from him, so I'm still expecting that.
We'll keep bugging him about that. Here. All right. Well, really appreciate. Yeah, some got called out there. Appreciate you sharing this. Look forward to people taking a look at these. We did put a link to them into the chat window in here, but we'll make sure those also get published in the show notes as well. So, thank you so much, Elio. Appreciate your time and showing this wonderful stuff for us to be able to take a look at.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And next on our agenda is going to be Nick Charlebois talking about Microsoft Graph Data Connect. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. All right. So it's good to see some familiar name in the audience. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Nick Charlebois. As Brian mentioned, I'm part of the Microsoft Graph customer and partner experience team, and I focus on Microsoft Graph Data Connect. So essentially, when you think of the Microsoft Graph story, there are really three main pieces to the entire Graph story, right? There's the REST APIs, which we're all used to, that have been around for a couple of years now. There's the Graph Connectors, which essentially does data ingestion, allows you to enrich what you have in the graph. And then there's this third piece at the bottom of the diagram here, that's Data Connect, that lets you extract information in bulk from the Microsoft Graph. When you think of Microsoft Graph Data Connect, we really focus on three key areas. The first one is being able to get data at scale. And so being able to extract millions and millions of rows of data in a timely fashion. Today, if you were to try to extract information, let's say about emails for every user in the tenant, using the REST API, you're going to be facing some throttling limits, right? So for you to be able to do that, you're probably looking at several hours, if not days, to be able to do that. When Microsoft Graph Data Connect will let you extract information about every user in the tenant or from specific groups that you specify, and everything will be done within ballpark figures, normally between 35 to 45 minutes, depending on the amount of data you export, but everything will be done in a timely fashion. The second focus area is the data privacy. So today, if you were to grant an app registration access to read information about emails, for example, if you're not granting the mail that read basic permissions, by default, that application will have access to read everything about the email, including the body preview. So all the information that you might not necessarily need or want to grant the application access to. With Data Connect, what you end up doing is you essentially create a contract between the tenant admin and the application that's going to be performing the extraction. So you specify, all right, I want to get information about, let's say, events or emails for my users, but I don't want to go and extract information about the body, the actual content of the email. So you can filter it out, and when the extraction happens, that property will never be extracted. So it won't ever make it to the end result file. When you're extracting data using Microsoft Graph Data Connect, essentially what you're doing is you're creating a raw JSON file that's going to be hosted in an Azure storage account. Right? So if you're specifying that you don't want the body preview and the body of the email, those properties will never make it into that raw exported file. And then the third focus area is really data governance and security. Because the data is going to be stored in an Azure storage account, you have access to all the audit logs to be able to figure out who's been reading that data, who's been interacting with the data you've exported. On top of this, the tenants, remember I was mentioning that contract that you need to establish, the tenant admin will also be able to review that contract and grant or revoke access to your application to be able to extract that information or filter it down, right? So let's say, for example, you requested access for the emails of the legal and human resources team in your tenant. The tenant admin will receive that contract, say, all right, so we're trying to extract the emails from everybody in those two groups. Oh, but I don't want them to have access to the legal team. So I can then use what we call the denial list and filter out the result and say, look, we're going to grant you access to the human resources group, but not to the legal team. So data governance and security. So overall, how it works, there is an Azure component to Microsoft Graph Data Connect. So essentially what you need to do is create an Azure data factory. And in there, you're going to be defining a data pipeline. That data pipeline will extract a data source that is of type Microsoft 365. And you will specify what data set you want to go and export. On the other end of the pipeline, you're going to have what we call a sink. So essentially, in this case, it's an Azure storage account. In the demo I'm going to be doing in just a few minutes, it's going to be an Azure Data Lake storage account. And then essentially, the pipeline will get authenticated by impersonating an Azure app registration that you defined. And the data will go and get extracted as a raw JSON file in that storage account. Today, we support multiple data sets. Most of them revolve around the Outlook entities. We have planned to introduce new data sets such as the SharePoint Online file sharing, file usage. We are going to be releasing the Teams chat that you see at the bottom of this slide here is going to be released within the next few weeks. And those are the one-on-one chats and the one-to-many. We have information about calendar view, events, messages, contacts, and so on. Right? So all the data sets you're seeing here are available for you to try today. We recently updated our documentation with the Build conference being last week. So we just updated our documentation, and you can find sample data sets for every data set that we support as well. So if you just go to docs.microsoft.com, search for Microsoft Graph Data Connect, where you have the list of all the supported data sets, you also have links to sample data sets that contain about 10 rows of data, but it just gives you a good idea of what's actually contained within those data sets. So we mentioned previously that you have data privacy. I kind of got ahead of myself there. I have a slide on it, but essentially when you create the pipeline, you define the terms of the contract. So you're extracting information for what users and what properties are you extracting the data for. So let's do a quick demo of this. So essentially the first thing I did is I created a storage account, so an Azure Data Lake storage. that has a container called datasets with the messages folder. This is where I'm going to go and export the information from. So I'm going to be extracting information about all the emails in my tenant, and I'm going to be storing the file in this storage account. In order for you to be able to activate Microsoft Graph Data Connect, as a tenant admin, what you do is you navigate to your Office 365 or Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You go to the settings, org settings, and in there, you're going to be able to see Microsoft Graph Data Connect listed right here. Simply click on it, and then all you need to do is turn on Microsoft Graph Data Connect for your entire organization. You also need to specify an Azure AD group of people that are going to be responsible for approving the request. So remember that contract that I mentioned? People in this team here are going to be the people that are allowed to go and approve or revoke the data extraction. So in my case, the group is called MGDC approvers. Now let's go and create our data factory. So I'm going to go in here. I already have one created, but I want to create a new one just to show you how easy it is. I'm just going to go in, add a new one, name it community call 2, let's say. I'm not going to do Git integration in this case. I'm just going to go and create a brand new one. That normally takes about 10 seconds to complete. And what this is going to give me is essentially Azure Data Factory. For those of you that have never played with it, it's going to give me a new workbench where I can go in and define in a visual fashion what my ETLs or extract, transform, and load operations are going to be on any data set. So this is what the Azure Data Factory workbench looks like. I'm going to go in and edit my pipeline, or actually I'm going to go and create a new pipeline here. And then I have a set of different activities that I can perform on the data. In my case, Microsoft Graph Data Connect is actually a source for the copy data, right? So just remember, we're going to be extracting that data and storing it as a raw JSON file. So I'm going to drag and drop that copy data activity. I can give it whatever name I want, so copy M365 data, for example. And then I'm going to need to go and specify a source. So what data am I extracting? And a sink, which is essentially where I'm going to be storing the data at the other end. So let's start with the source. I'm going to go in and define a new data set. And in here, I'm going to be searching for the Office 365 data set. Click continue on this. I'm going to go and edit the properties of it. What I need to do is create what we call a link service. So essentially authenticating against my tenant. In my case, what I've done is I created an app registration in my tenant that doesn't have any permissions whatsoever. So I didn't grant it any API permissions. We're only going to be using that app registration to authenticate back to our sink. So my storage account actually has granted blob contributor role to that service principal. I'm going to test the connection first, make sure everything works. I'm going to go and create that. So we're good. Now I have a list of all the data sets available. In my case, I'm going to go and pick the messages data set. Right? So that is going to give me access to all the emails in my tenant. I'm going to go back to my pipeline. What I'm going to do is I'm going to import the schema. So what it's going to do is it's going to analyze what that data set contains as far as data fields, and it's going to load them all in here. And you can see if you scroll down that I do have access right now to the buddy and buddy preview. So my organization has privacy concern with those two. I'm going to select them out and just remove them from the exported schema. I'm going to specify a filter as well. So I'm going to say I only want to extract information from emails that were sent in, let's say, the past quarter. So from March 1st to June 1st. And then what I'm going to do is by default, it's going to go and extract information about all users in the Office 365 tenant. I want to change that, and I want to specify specific groups. So in my case, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do the legal department, the legal team, and the finance. Yep, if I can only type properly, and finance. So it's only going to go and extract information from these two groups. So it looks like my source is good. Next thing I need to do is specify where I'm going to be storing that exported file. So I'm going to go and create a new data set for the sink. In my case, I'm going to be picking the Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. It's like this. The only available format is binary. So it's essentially going to be a binary file, but that contains raw JSON in it. Same as the source data set, I need to go and create a new link service. Remember that I need to authenticate with a service principal. I'm going to pick my storage account, which is community call. And then I'm just going to go and copy the information about my service principal. So the app ID and an app secret that I created for my app registration. Just going to test that, make sure it works. We're all good. I create the link service. Now I'm going to go in and go in my data set container that I showed you previously. And I'm going to select that messages folder. All right, so we're all set. My sync is created, my source is created. What I can do now is publish that pipeline. I'm going to click publish on this, and then I'm going to go and manually trigger it. What you can do is you can actually have scheduled triggers, right? So let's say you want to do an export every quarter or every week. You can have a scheduled trigger. You can have what we call tumbling windows, so every 3 hours. In my case, I'm just going to do a manual trigger, and that's going to go and officially send that contract, right? So that contract here where I'm saying I want to extract from these two groups, these fields to the tenant admin. Now, as the tenant admin, remember to activate Microsoft Graph Data Connect, I go to settings, org settings, and then from the Microsoft Graph Data Connect blade, I'm going to have access to what we call the PAM portal, so the Privileged Access Management portal. If I click on this, this is going to bring me to a list of all requests that are either that have been approved, that have been revoked, or that are pending. And we can see right here, I do have a request pending for my pipeline. I'm going to go and take a look at this. By the way, this interface here is going to be, we're working on improving the visual for this. Right now, you can see that the request has been made for the finance and legal team for all these columns here, right? So again, we're going to change that to be in tabular format so that's a little more user-friendly, but you can review, make sure that the body is not there. And then let's say in my case, I want to approve for the finance team, but legal team, this is a no-no. So I'm just going to go in and pick legal from here. So I can filter the request and say approve. And boom. So essentially the pipeline will start its execution. The data will be stored in my Azure storage account. And then I'm going to end up with a file that looks like this here that is raw JSON that represents the content of the emails I've extracted. Okay. And with this, really, really easily, once you have access to that data, you can start creating some very interesting insights using something like Power BI, for example. So for example, in my case, what I've done, and this is a true example, is my test tenant. I've actually mapped my exported JSON file to Power BI dashboard. And in here, for example, I'm getting insights as to, all right, how are people using attachments in my my environment? You can see that you have a link. So reference attachment is essentially when you're linking to a file in your OneDrive instead of sending the actual attachment where people are creating those _v2, _v3, and so on. I want people to start using reference attachment, but you can see that only 0.04% of my organization is using it. So there's probably room for improvement, right? I could probably do a training program or something. Email statuses, right? So how many emails are unread, but based on different teams, right? So you can try to understand, all right, how are teams, what teams are overloaded, right? Let's say your human resources team, on average, they have 300 unread emails per person. Well, maybe there's something wrong there, right? You should probably try to figure out what's going on. Why are they overloaded like this? Being able to understand trends. When are people using emails throughout the day? And then you can go and do those very interesting deep insights and figure out, all right, how are people collaborating inside of my organization, right? What are the collaboration diagrams? How are people talking with one another across the different teams? And that will easily surface very interesting insights. So for example, this is my retail team. They're not talking to my HR team at all. Like, why is that, right? Seems like my HR team is only talking to the finance team through these two folks. Like, where is the connection there? And this, all the dashboard I showed you there was built within about 5 minutes just by exposing that raw JSON data that you've exported. And so this is just to give you an idea of what's possible. Now, Brian's going to be talking about our technical assessment program later on. We do have a specific program for Data Connect, which is essentially going to be giving access to data sets that we're planning on releasing, gathering feedback about what fields people are looking for, and helping us prioritize what data sets should be released next. So definitely, if you're interested in that, we invite you to join the TAP program. So on that note, Brian, if you want to take over.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing about Microsoft Graph Data Connect. I know not everyone's always familiar with it, so it's good to see kind of in real terms how it functions, where you can be able to use it, and even some of the Power BI reporting, some great stuff to show into there. We unfortunately are at the end of our time, so we do not have any time for Q&A. But if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Again, our email's on there previously for the sending in for submissions. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any follow-ups that you'd like for the presenters, and we could try and track those down for you and see if we can get any answers. Now, I will go ahead and reshare my screen here. Do also note that we are now on Microsoft Q&A. So if you're not familiar, previously we had a lot of things on Stack Overflow. We do want to begin promoting our Microsoft Q&A site. This is where we're able to essentially dig a little bit deeper, since this is a Microsoft property, where we can be able to ask for maybe potentially confidential information or things to help with troubleshooting. So if you'd like to go and ask questions on Microsoft Q&A, you can go ahead to aka.ms/askgraph. Go and find the appropriate tag within our Microsoft Graph section and feel free to post those questions out there. We do have a dedicated team who's actually going out and answering those questions. So a great place to go and be able to ask questions, but also if you'd like to go and look for other ones, maybe we also contribute in there, feel free to go and take a look at that. Also do want to note that we have a number of different sessions that were related to Microsoft Graph at Microsoft Build of last week. So if you take a look on the screen on here, again, probably best if you want to take a look at the recording, go look at all the different session codes that are on there, or if you'd like to go into the session catalog and do a quick search for Microsoft Graph, you can find a number of different breakout sessions, number of on-demand sessions, roundtables that were also, those were not recorded, but other things that were available for us. So feel free to take a look at the Microsoft Build resources and other sessions that were last week. Lots of great content, lots of good announcements, and some deeper dives into some other topics that would be very, very useful. As Nick was mentioning, we do have our Microsoft Graph TAP program. It's our technology adoption program. With this, we host a monthly call where we dive a little bit deeper into maybe some NDA topics, things that are not going to be for public consumption. So we do have a requirement of having an NDA in place, but lots of other different things that we make available through this, whether it's private previews or additional ways to share feedback to the various product groups. So feel free to take a look at the aka.ms/graph TAP form. Feel free to submit yourself into there, and we'll work on onboarding folks as those come in. We do have a number of different developer community calls that are ongoing. So take a look at aka.ms/m365dev calls. You can go and find a number of different community calls that are ongoing. One thing we do want to make a note for, and we'll dive into this a little bit deeper in some of our future months, but the scheduling for our various calls, a number of them are going to essentially be combining into a kind of shared M365 developer community call. So rather than having individual breakouts for separate different groups, we're actually going to have a nice kind of shared combined scheduling. So look for more of this to be coming along in the August timeframe. We're still in the kind of early days of transitioning between the different groups and coordinating into one kind of cohesive unit for this. But just note that we will have more to announce in this probably in the July timeframe in terms of logistics and the way that things will continue forward. So just a quick note about that. A couple of other community resources you can take a look at. We do have the Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast at m365devpodcast.com. Feel free to take a look at the different episodes that are out there. And you can subscribe to a number of different resources, whether it's on Stitcher or Spotify, Apple iTunes, lots of other locations. Also, our Microsoft Graph Mailbag series on the Microsoft Graph blog, aka.ms/msgraphmailbag. We're publishing on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month, so lots of different topics for deep dives or more information regarding Microsoft Graph, lots of kind of lessons, tips, tricks, things like that as well. And as always, our recordings will be available on the Microsoft 365 Developer YouTube channel at aka.ms/m365dev YouTube. Feel free to subscribe and follow along on there. And in terms of our next call, we'll be on July 6th at 8 a.m. on Pacific time. You can find the link for getting the recurring series for this, aka.ms/Microsoft Graph call. And with that, we thank everyone for your time today. Wonderful topics to be able to discuss. Appreciate all of your participation and being able to join in. So with that, have a great, wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.